The rain had been falling since before dawn, streaking the tall windows of Jefferson Middle School with silver threads. Inside room 214, the air was heavy with the faint smell of wet jackets and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. Mrs. Caroline Whitmore, a woman in her late 40s with neat chestnut hair and a reputation for being one of the school's strictest teachers, stood at the front of the classroom. She held a copy of Romeo and Juliet in one hand and tapped the other against the desk for emphasis as she read aloud. Her voice was firm, crisp, and carried the kind of authority that brooked no nonsense. But at the very back of the room, Jasmine Carter was somewhere else entirely. 14 years old, wearing a faded hoodie and jeans, she had her head bent low over her desk, scribbling quickly in a small spiral notebook. Caroline's eyes narrowed. She'd noticed Jasmine's behavior slipping all week. Late arrivals, missing homework, whispered conversations during lessons. In Caroline's mind, this was yet another display of disrespect. "Jasmine," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the hum of the rain outside. Heads turned. A few students snickered. The girl froze, the pencil still in her hand. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, without looking up. "Care to share with the rest of us what's so important that it can't wait until after class?" Carolyn asked, her tone cool and measured. "It's nothing," Jasmine muttered, tucking the notebook halfway into her backpack. Caroline felt her patience snap. "That's the third time this week you've disrupted the lesson. Clearly my warnings aren't working. Detention. After school. You can reflect on your priorities there." The room fell silent. A few students exchanged glances, the kind of quick, nervous looks that pass between kids when someone's in trouble. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She didn't argue, didn't plead her case. She just shoved the notebook deep into her bag and stared down at the corner of her desk, the muscles in her shoulders tight. Caroline turned back to her lesson, but there was an odd heaviness in the room now. Outside, the rain kept falling, tapping steadily against the glass. A soft, relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the tension hanging in the air. By the time the lunch bell rang, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. Students shuffled through the crowded hallways, their sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, jackets dripping small puddles onto the floor. The cafeteria smelled of reheated pizza and tater tots, the air thick with chatter and the metallic clatter of trays. Jasmine Carter sat alone at a corner table, her hoodie pulled up like a shield. She picked at a sandwich she hadn't touched since she sat down, peeling off bits of crust and dropping them onto her tray. Her notebook, the same one from class, was wedged between her arm and the table, as if she didn't want anyone to see it. Around her, whispers traveled in the invisible current of middle school gossip. "That's the girl who got detention again," a boy at the next table said in a low voice. Not low enough. "Yeah, she's always in trouble," a girl replied, balancing a carton of chocolate milk. "My cousin's in her math class. Says she talks back all the time." "That's not true," another voice chimed in. "But I heard her mom works nights. She's probably tired all the time. Maybe she's just grumpy." Jasmine kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but every word landed like a pebble thrown at her back. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Whitmore sat at a round table with a mug of coffee, grading essays with red pen in quick, decisive strokes. The hum of the vending machine filled the pauses in conversation around her. At the counter, two fellow teachers were talking in low tones. "I saw Jasmine Carter on the detention list again," said Mr. Howard, the science teacher. "That's her third time this month." "Yeah," replied Mrs. Klein, the guidance counselor. "Her mom's a nurse, works overnight shifts at the hospital. Sometimes Jasmine has to get her little brother ready for school before coming here. She's juggling more than most of these kids." Caroline didn't look up from her grading, but she heard every word. Still, her thoughts stayed firm. Responsibility is responsibility. Life doesn't hand out passes. She took another sip of coffee and flipped to the next essay. In her mind, Jasmine's detention was still justified, a consequence for behavior, nothing more. But outside, the rain kept pounding the windows, and somewhere in the back of Caroline's mind, an unease was growing. She just didn't recognize it yet. The final bell rang at 3:05, releasing the school into a tide of backpacks, chatter, and rain-slicked sneakers. The hallways echoed with the sound of lockers slamming and the muted roar of hundreds of voices heading for freedom. Mrs. Whitmore stood just outside her classroom door, watching the last few stragglers pass. Her eyes found Jasmine Carter moving at a slow, steady pace toward the detention room at the end of the hall. Hoodie up, backpack straps gripped tightly, head down. She looked every bit the picture of reluctant compliance. Satisfied, Caroline turned back into her classroom to tidy up her desk before heading home. She always stayed late on Thursdays, but she liked knowing that students who'd crossed a line were serving their time a few doors away. At 3:20, she stopped by the detention room to drop off a stack of ungraded quizzes. The detention supervisor, Mr. Langley, was leaning back in his chair, eyes on the computer. "Where's Jasmine Carter?" Caroline asked. Langley glanced at the clipboard. "Didn't sign in." Caroline's brow furrowed. "She walked right past me after the bell. She should have been here 15 minutes ago." "Guess she had other plans," Langley said with a shrug. Caroline felt her irritation spike. Skipping detention? That's a straight trip to the principal's office tomorrow? She made a mental note to document the infraction, but something about the empty chair at the back of the room stayed with her longer than she expected. Across town, the rain hammered harder against the streets. Jasmine's sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as she cut through the narrow side roads leading toward Maplewood Street. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't even considered it. From the bus window earlier that afternoon, she'd seen a faint, curling column of smoke rising above the rooftops near the Parkers' house. The family with 3 kids, 2 of whom were in her homeroom. At first, she'd thought it was just a chimney, but then she remembered. The Parkers didn't have a fireplace. Now, as she rounded the corner, the smell hit her, acrid and thick, the unmistakable stench of burning wood and something else, sharper, like plastic. Her pulse kicked into overdrive. Halfway down the block, she saw it. Flames licking out from the lower right window, orange light flickering against the gray rain. She didn't think about detention. She didn't think about Mrs. Whitmore's scolding. She thought about Mia and Caleb Parker and their toddler sister Lily, and the fact that their mom worked late shifts. And she ran. The closer Jasmine got to the Parker house, the heavier the air felt, thick with smoke and heat even in the rain. The street was eerily quiet, except for the muffled crackle of flames and the low wail of a smoke alarm from somewhere inside. She sprinted up the front steps and pounded on the door with both fists. "Mia! Caleb! It's Jasmine! Open the door!" A few seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing Mia Parker, her small face smudged with soot, eyes red from the smoke. She was coughing hard, the sound raw in her throat. "Where's your mom?" Jasmine asked urgently. "At work. We can't get out the back door," Mia gasped. "It's stuck." Before she could even finish, a thin cry came from somewhere deeper inside the house. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She grabbed Mia's hand, pulled her out onto the porch, and shoved her into the arms of a startled neighbor who had just stepped outside. "I'll get the others," Jasmine said, already turning back. The moment she stepped inside, the heat slammed into her, like opening an oven door. The living room was hazy, smoke curling down from the ceiling. The smell was choking, a mix of burning wood, melted plastic, and something metallic. She ducked low, moving quickly toward the sound of the crying. She found Caleb, 6 years old, clutching his toddler sister Lily in the hallway. Both were barefoot, their pajamas streaked with ash. Caleb's eyes were wide and glassy, and Lily's cheeks were wet with tears. "It's okay, I've got you," Jasmine said firmly, crouching to their level. She wrapped Lily in a blanket pulled from the couch and took Caleb's hand. "Stay low. Crawl if you have to. Follow me." She led them through the living room, her eyes stinging as she squinted through the gray haze. The front door seemed impossibly far away, each step feeling heavier as the heat pressed in. They reached the porch just as a gust of wind fanned the flames inside, sending sparks shooting toward the ceiling. Jasmine thrust the children into the arms of the neighbor, who now stood wide-eyed and trembling. "I called 911, the neighbor said breathlessly. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. Jasmine stepped back toward the house, scanning for anyone else inside, but the neighbor caught her wrist. "That's all of them. Don't go back in." Jasmine nodded reluctantly, backing away as the first fire engine rounded the corner, its lights painting the wet street red and blue. She stood on the curb, her hoodie soaked from rain and streaked with soot. watching as firefighters poured into the home. Her lungs burned, her eyes watered, but she didn't care. Mia, Caleb, and Lily were safe. That was all that mattered. The following morning, the rain had stopped, but the air over Jefferson Middle School still carried the damp chill of yesterday's storm. Mrs. Caroline Whitmore arrived early, as she always did, her satchel heavy with essays to grade and lesson plans to refine. She stepped into the nearly empty teacher's lounge, set her coffee on the table, and switched on the wall-mounted television for some background noise. She was halfway through taking the first sip when a headline caught her eye. Local teen saves 3 children from house fire. The image that filled the screen made her freeze. There was Jasmine, hoodie streaked with soot, hair frizzed from the rain, cheeks still blotchy from heat and smoke, standing on a sidewalk under the flashing lights of a fire engine. She was speaking into a microphone held by a reporter, her voice quiet but steady. "I just knew I had to get them out," Jasmine was saying. "I wasn't thinking about anything else." The anchor's voice cut in. 14-year-old Jasmine Carter was on her way home from school yesterday when she noticed smoke coming from a neighbor's house. She pulled 3 children to safety before firefighters arrived. No one was injured, and officials say her quick thinking may have saved their lives. Caroline's coffee sat untouched. Her mind was moving backward, to the moment in the hallway when she'd seen Jasmine heading toward detention, to Mr. Langley saying she'd never signed in, to the irritation she'd felt at the thought of a student skipping punishment. She'd assumed Jasmine had gone home to avoid facing consequences. Instead, Jasmine had been running toward a burning building. Caroline sank into a chair, her pulse unsteady. The teachers trickling into the lounge were buzzing with conversation. "Did you see the news? That girl's a hero. I can't believe she's one of our students." The weight in Caroline's chest grew heavier with each comment. She didn't just feel surprised. She felt ashamed. Because the truth was painfully simple. She'd never asked Jasmine why she was distracted in class, or why she was late, or what she'd been scribbling in that notebook. She'd just assumed the worst, and acted on it. And now, the whole town knew what Jasmine had done. The school day moved at its usual pace, lockers slamming, bells ringing, sneakers squeaking on polished floors. But for Mrs. Caroline Whitmore, everything felt slightly out of step. Every time she passed a group of students whispering in the hallway, she caught fragments. "That's her. Saved those kids." Or, "They should put her on the news again." By fourth period, Caroline couldn't focus on her lesson. She caught herself rereading the same sentence from Romeo and Juliet 3 times, her mind stuck on the image of Jasmine standing outside that burning house, the quiet bravery in her face, the soot smudged on her cheeks. When the lunch bell rang, Caroline left her classroom and scanned the hallway. She spotted Jasmine at her locker, slowly swapping books from her backpack. Her hoodie was gone, replaced by a plain t-shirt, but Caroline noticed faint pink marks along her wrists, the kind that might come from heat or smoke. Caroline hesitated for a second, then walked over. "Jasmine," she said softly. The girl turned, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like she was bracing for criticism. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." Caroline swallowed, aware that the words she was about to speak didn't come easily to her. "I saw the news this morning." Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her voice was cautious. "Okay. What you did, it was brave," Caroline continued, her tone quieter now. "You risked a lot to help those kids." Jasmine looked away, shrugging one shoulder. "I couldn't just walk past." Caroline nodded slowly. "I realize now I didn't know the whole story. Yesterday I assumed the worst about you. I didn't ask questions. I didn't give you a chance to explain, and I'm sorry for that." For a long moment, Jasmine didn't respond. The only sound was the metallic clatter of a locker door slamming down the hall. Finally, she said, "You didn't ask because you already made up your mind." The words weren't bitter, just factual, and that made them land even harder. "You're right," Caroline admitted, "and that was unfair." She took a small breath. "If you're willing, I'd like to start over." Jasmine studied her for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Caroline felt the smallest thread of tension loosen in her chest. A week later, the rain was gone, replaced by a bright, cloudless sky that poured sunlight through the tall windows of Jefferson Middle School's gymnasium. The wooden bleachers groaned under the weight of hundreds of students, all buzzing with anticipation. The hum of chatter was punctuated by the occasional squeak of sneakers on the polished floor. The stage at the front was draped in a deep blue curtain, the school's crest printed proudly on a banner above it. A small podium stood at the center, flanked by the American flag and the state flag. Mrs. Caroline Whitmore sat in the front row of faculty seats, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes kept drifting toward the side of the stage, where Jasmine Carter stood with the principal, wearing a simple dress instead of her usual hoodie. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and there was a quiet, almost shy smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The principal stepped up to the microphone. "Today," he began, his voice amplified across the gym, "we recognize one of our own, a student who showed extraordinary courage and selflessness." A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Caroline saw a few students craning their necks for a better view of Jasmine. On the afternoon of March 14th, the principal continued, Jasmine Carter noticed smoke coming from a neighbor's home. Without hesitation, she acted, pulling 3 children to safety before firefighters arrived. Her bravery saved lives. Her actions remind us all that heroes can walk quietly among us, sitting in our classrooms, eating in our cafeteria. The applause swelled, filling the space like a wave. Caroline clapped along, her eyes locked on Jasmine. She thought about that afternoon, the empty seat in detention, the smudged notebook, the assumptions she had made without asking a single question. The principal held out a framed certificate. "Jasmine, on behalf of the Jefferson community, we thank you." Jasmine stepped forward to accept it. From the bleachers, 3 small figures darted down, Mia, Caleb, and little Lily Parker, and wrapped themselves around her in a tight hug. The audience melted into a collective awe. Jasmine's smile widened, genuine and unguarded. Caroline felt a warmth spread through her, a mixture of pride and something quieter, resolve. She realized the lesson here wasn't about Shakespeare or discipline. It was about taking the time to see beyond the surface, to ask before assuming, to listen before judging. Later that afternoon, back in her classroom, Caroline paused mid-lesson when she noticed a boy in the second row staring absently out the window. A month ago, she might have called him out sharply. This time, she tilted her head and asked, "Is there something on your mind you'd like to share with the class?" The boy blinked, surprised, then began to speak. And as he did, Caroline thought of Jasmine and the quiet reminder that sometimes the best teaching begins with listening.